One of the most popular ways to start a scrapbook page is with your photos. For a lot of us, that is the reason we scrapbook. We want to document and preserve our memories, our stories, and the photos are the star of the show. It could be a little bit overwhelming, especially now that most of us are working with digital prints. And when you go to pick photos to start a new layout, you can be looking at hundreds or even thousands of photos and trying to narrow it down. Especially things like vacations, special events, weddings, baby photos. It can be really hard to narrow it down to the best ones or the ones that help you tell your story the best. So in today's video, what I want to do is walk you through my process start to finish and how I narrow down my selections for my photos, edit them, print them to the size that I want, and then go ahead and make a layout with them. I hope you'll find this super helpful. Now let's get started. I have a Mac computer and an iPhone, so I keep all my photos in iPhoto, and that's what you're looking at right now. We just got back from a trip from Hawaii, and we had a lovely time. It was amazing. It was our daughter's first time flying and her first time at the ocean. It was such a good time. I have so many pictures to scrapbook. This one right here was her first time just like playing in the ocean and having a great time. Daddy was out there with her, just helping her through the waves and stuff. And I know I want to do a 2-page layout on this, and I'm just trying to narrow down which photos I'm going to use. So I do keep a special album over here on the left that says photos to print. And then as I'm selecting photos, I'm just going to drop them in there so I'm not constantly looking at all of these pictures. So I think I might want to do this one. That one looks kind of fun. I know I want to use this one because this one's really pretty. And I am going to select more than what I need and then narrow it down from there. This is probably one of the hardest things, one of the most time-consuming things is narrowing down what photos to use. And when it comes down to these, they're all fairly similar, but I'm looking for kind of my favorite facial expressions or the ones with the most water movement. And I will just select a couple and then I can narrow it down from there. But it helps to get me out of the overwhelm of where there's so many pictures and I just keep scrolling between them and can't narrow it down. So now that I have narrowed down my photos, I can go into my photos to print, and here is a much smaller selection of photos, kind of my top choices, and I find this so much less overwhelming. I'm not looking at 20, 30 photos trying to pick out my favorites. I have it narrowed down, and from here I can narrow it down even more. So this is something I've been doing for a little while and I find it very helpful. Now you can see I have some photos that need some editing. They need to be straightened, some need to be brightened, but I don't want to go in and edit all of these photos if I'm not going to use them on this layout. So the next step for me usually in the process is picking my design because I don't want to do more work than I have to, and I rather decide on my design before I print my photos so they're the right size, the right orientation, and I'm not wasting photo paper or my time or anything like that. So this is a good time to go ahead and look at picking a sketch. Now, I don't always use a sketch, but I do find them helpful and they speed along the process. So I am using the Creative Design Team. This is the Volume 2 12x12 sketchbook, and I have a couple of options. So this one here, it was the one that originally caught my eye. I love that large title. I love how this is laid out with lots of room for embellishment. But then I flipped over to the very next page and I saw this one. Now this one, I wouldn't have to do very much embellishing. The photos are very much the star of the show, and I could fit almost all the photos that I selected. So I'm very tempted to do this one, and I could fit all those different photos on here. It's a really great design. But then I thought, well, I'm not really helping you narrow down your photos very much if I do that, because lots of times we have to narrow it way down to get them to fit on a layout. Of course, you can do things like Pocket Plus or flip flaps and fit even more photos. So I am really torn between these two. There's tons of great designs in these sketchbooks, and I really recommend choosing a sketch and then printing your photos to the correct sizes just to simplify your process. Okay, I think I am going to go for that sketch that has a lot of photos. I just love the idea of being able to use a lot of these, and then everything is kind of in one layout. So what I need to do now is decide which ones are going in which spot. So typically the ones on the left side I want facing to the right if they are facing one way or the other. Photos that are kind of straight on, you can do either way, and sometimes that does lead me to flipping my photos. I have two very similar scenery shots here, and so I can decide between one of these. I don't need to use both of them. Both of them have my husband and daughter in them. This one's a little bit more empty and vast. This one shows a bit more of the shoreline. I do like that, so I think maybe I'm going to use this one. And so this other one I can just delete out of this album. It doesn't delete it off the computer, it just deletes it out of the album. So let's go ahead and start editing some of these. I know I'm definitely going to use this one, probably on the left-hand page at the bottom in that one 4x6 photo spot. Now, when you take a portrait shot on an iPhone, you can change up the lighting, which I love this one, the studio light. It usually highlights the focal point, and it's really helpful for like brightening skin tone and faces. You also have contour light, this blackout or stage light mono. I don't usually end up using any of these ones, but I do use this one quite a bit, the studio light. Or you have natural light, which is kind of like the default. I like how it brightens the focus. And then other settings that I often adjust are brilliance. It just kind of brightens up the whole picture a bit. I will often up my exposure a little bit to brighten, or you can tweak the brightness as well. One thing to keep in mind, if you're editing a whole series of photos, you may want to jot down what settings, like how much exposure you're using, just so that your photos look similar and that they go together. You don't have one that's super edited and one that is not. Vibrance is also a nice one to just help the colors pop. You don't want to go too far because things can get kind of weird looking, but it can just help the colors just pop a little bit more. So usually I just drag the sliders back and forth and just see what I like, and then that's where I settle. I don't always retouch everything. You have white balance and things like that in here. You can also make it black and white. I will use cast sometimes if my picture is overly blue or overly yellow, can help fix that. But I think that's all I really want to do in here. I think that's looking pretty good. Of course, once you print your first photo, that also gives you an idea of how true to the computer it is. Sometimes I do go back and tweak something if it didn't print quite how I thought it was going to. Now, the other option is crop. I could bring this in and crop this little kid out here, but then I lose some of the background. The other thing I was thinking of is seeing if I want to straighten this. I think that looks better to get the horizon line. You can see how the grid lines pop up and you can kind of see if your photo is straight. I like that a little bit better to make sure it's straight. And you can always go back to revert original if you want your original photo. Another step that I sometimes do is if I need this photo to go on, let's say, the right page of the layout, I don't want her looking out, like pointing out to the edge of the layout. I want the photos pointing in so that it points your eye inwards into the layout instead of off the edge. And so sometimes I will come over here to flip and just flip my photo so that it's going the direction that I need it to. For this one, I am able to use it this way because I'll just put it on the left-hand page. Taking good photos and editing them is a skill that you develop over time, and I've been taking some Skillshare classes to help me improve. This video is sponsored by Skillshare, and if you haven't heard of them before, Skillshare is an online learning community for creative people with classes on a huge variety of topics, including photography, illustration, design, productivity, and lots more. I recently took this class called iPhone Photography: How to Take Pro Photos on Your iPhone, which walked me through what settings to turn on or off on my phone, ways to compose photos so they are visually appealing, and then editing tips to really make my photos pop. As a scrapbooker, the quality of my photos really matters to me, and it's just so much more fun to scrapbook really nice photos. There are several other classes on the same topic, and I'm looking forward to diving into those as well. Skillshare has made some recent improvements to their community with smarter class categories, 3 new class topics that include creative careers, creative inspiration, and AI and innovations. I would really like to learn more about the AI part of things because it's not something that I have really delved into yet. You can also now find classes by software or material. So if you search for classes on Canva or Photoshop, then you can see all the options in one place. Skillshare makes it easy to learn new things and to work at your own pace. If you're interested in checking out everything Skillshare has to offer, the first 500 people to join Skillshare using my link will get 1 month of premium membership for free. The link is in the description box below. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now, one more thing I want to show you is how I put my photos into collages to make 3x4 prints. I could create a custom photo size and print on a 4x6, but I'd rather be able to squeeze 2 photos onto a 4x6. So to do that, I am just going to open up the Project Life app. That is usually the one that I use. And I'll just go to Create 4x6 Prints, and this is the one that automatically comes up. And now this is where it's really handy to also have your photos in a special folder, because instead of looking through all of my recent photos, I can just go to Photos to Print, boom, there's all my photos that I had selected. So now I can just go ahead and drop those in. And I don't need to do anything to them. And then down off screen here, you can't see it, there's a little box with an arrow, and that's where you go to select Export, Image, and then I'm going to send it to my photos. So there it is in my regular library. Then I can just Command P to send it to print. And I do need to switch this back to borderless and then fit. I think fit and fill are pretty similar on this. I usually just select fit and then hit print. Here are all my printed photos. They are ready to go and stick on the page. I did end up trimming them down, so they're about 1/4 inch smaller. So 3 3/4 by 3 3/4 instead of a 4x4, and that worked out perfectly. The 4x6 I cut in half so it could bridge both pages, and I am just going to follow the sketch and lay out my photos. I love seeing all of these together in a little collection. I think this looks really good and really eye-catching. If you wanted to use the same page design, but maybe you don't have as many photos, you could always put some pieces of pattern paper or some pocket cards in there to break up this grid. The pattern paper I'm using today is some old stuff from my stash. It's called No Worries, and it's from close to my heart several years ago. And I just picked a few patterns from this collection that I thought would go really well with my photos and followed the measurements on the sketch to cut them up. I decided I wanted a little bit of texture, so these 2 strips on the end, I'm going to rip them. Now I have to be super careful because I didn't cut extra to leave room for ripping, so I am ripping just the tiniest bit off of both of these strips. And I'm not going to make you watch that full process, but I did do it to both of them. I decided not to rip the bottom piece that goes across both pages. Now I'm pulling out the Perennial Postage dies. These are a classic die from Stampin' Up! That I absolutely love, and I'll probably use them for a very long time. So I cut one on Kraft, and then I just cut a piece of white that was a little bit smaller that I could use for my journaling. Luckily, I didn't put my photos down too hard, so I can slip things underneath. I'm bringing in this really pretty Beauty of the Deep stamp set and my Close to My Heart Evergreen ink. I'm going to use that tall seaweed image, and I'm going to kind of sneak it behind the journaling spot, and I'm going to have to do a little bit of masking because I didn't stamp this before I put everything on. I kind of thought I wanted to use it, but I wasn't sure exactly where it should go, so I just figured I would cross that bridge when I come to it. So I'm just going to stamp a couple behind here. I decided to use Evergreen because I was looking at all the colors in Isabella's swimsuit, and that's where I got most of my inspiration for the colors that I'm using. You can see here I'm masking off with a sticky note. I at first stuck it down with the sticky side to the photo paper. You don't want to do that. I'm using Epson semi-gloss paper, and it wants to hold on to everything. So don't use sticky notes on top of it. I just have to hold the masking paper. That is much better. I went through my Stampin' die collection and pulled out a few different sets, some of them current, some of them not. I'm using this Cape Cod card making workshop set for the little seashell dies, the Seaside wishes from Stampin' Up for those sand dollars, and also those circular die cuts. And then Beauty of the Deep, I'm using this kind of like coral die cut. I love this shape for adding to clusters, and so I decided to bring that one in as well. The Seaside Wishes set has a stamp, a die, and also a coordinating embossing folder. I decided not to use the embossing folder this time. I just stamped and die cut them. And then I chose all my colors from Isabella's swimsuit. So I have Close to My Heart Pear cardstock for the green like coral piece. This seashell is in Lagoon, the other seashell is in Glacier, and the pink is raspberry, all Close to My Heart colors. You can see that beautiful white core of the cardstock showing through when I sand it. I love that distressed look. I did sand the other pieces off camera, and I'm so excited that Stampin' Up! Is bringing in white core cardstock. I think it's going to be an awesome addition to their scrapbooking line. Now I'm bringing in the Toffee ink to ink up my edges. This is the color that I stamped my little sand dollars in, and I thought I would just do the very edge. I don't want to bring it in too far. It can be really easy to get grungy really fast, and I'm also trying to be careful not to touch my brush right to the paper immediately. I'm starting on my nonstick craft mat and then blending inwards so that I'm not getting like a really bold imprint of the blending brush. That can happen if you go straight from ink pad into or onto your cardstock. You can end up with some like marks that don't look very blended. As I get down towards the bottom here, I am going to mask off my photo so I don't accidentally get ink onto my photo, and I'm just going to keep the ink to the white area. I don't want to get onto the pattern paper. So I'm going to end it right there, and then I decided I'll ink the edge of my journaling piece, and then I'm also going to ink the edge of the Kraft piece that's die cut there as well. Now that I'm done the inking, I'm going to grab this Cosette card making set. This is an older one from Close to My Heart, and I'm going to just stamp with the same Toffee ink using these little postmarks and cancellation marks. I thought that would be fun because it's kind of like a travel thing. I think if you look up close, they say like Paris and stuff on them, but I don't think anyone will really look at that. It's kind of just the overall feel of like a postcard, travel, those kinds of things. And I could see using this as like a border or something on lots of different travel pages. Definitely doesn't have to be like a vacation to the beach. And I am kind of varying the shades of the color, so I'm doing it in the full color and then also stamping off on scrap paper so I get some lighter tones. And I like how that looks. It helps fade off the design. I'm going to go ahead and ink this page up. I'm just going to do the top edge, and then I want to create a little bit of a corner because I can't go right up to the corner, but I want to repeat the same design with the postmarks and the cancellation marks. So I need to have another little inky spot right here that will kind of show out from behind the cluster that I'm going to put in this spot. I've die cut another one of those Perennial Postage dies, this time from white cardstock, and I use this stamp from the Cape Cod Scrapbooking set that says Swimming in the Sea. I'm going to give it a little bit of inking around the edge. I did stamp the sentiment in Glacier, And you'll see later that it just works out being a little bit too light, so I am going to fix that a little bit later. I also die cut another one of these pieces in Kraft cardstock, and I'm just going to use this as a layer so that I have that shape in 3 different places on my layout. It doesn't really serve a purpose other than just continuing that shape and making my clusters kind of even. Repetition can be a great way to make your layout feel balanced and to feel cohesive. So by repeating the same stamps, the same shapes, and the same colors in each of the clusters, it makes it feel like it all goes together. Now, when it comes to putting these clusters together, it really does come down to just playing, trying things out, moving things around, and seeing what looks good to you. I want to have some of my bigger pieces at the back, some of my smaller pieces at the front or on top. And I like to kind of spread the colors around. Like the 2 brown sand dollars, I don't want them right on top of each other because they'll just blend in. So I have that pop of pink in between them, and you can see the 2 kind of blue or teal colors, they are spread out a little bit as well. The fine tip on the Bearly Art Glue works really good for gluing down all these delicate little die cuts. I can put tiny little dots on there. I can even tuck the tip underneath the pieces and just like squirt a little bit of glue to keep things in place. And I like that it dries matte. Most of my embellishments are all stuck down flat, but I thought I would pop up this last one, so I'm using dimensionals just to give it a little bit of height and add some variation. I'm just going to start laying out this other cluster, and while I do that, I wanted to just tell you about Isabella playing in the ocean. We weren't too sure how this was going to go because sometimes water's great, sometimes she's not so cool with it and gets a little scared. So we were kind of like tentatively, I wonder how this is going to go, but she loved it. She was out there in the surf with Daddy, of course, and he was holding her, and they were just standing there having the waves come in and hit them, and then she came in a little bit closer to the shore and just let the water wash over her. She was laying in the sand. We definitely had a swimsuit full of sand by the time we were done, but it was so much fun, and so much fun for me to sit back and watch. This was Isabella's first time seeing the ocean, her first airplane rides, first big vacation away, and I think we definitely made some core memories on this trip. That little happy place die cut is from the No Worries collection. There was a little pack that had a bunch of embellishments, and this one just fit perfectly in my cluster. Now, before I stick all of those down, I wanted to go ahead and repeat the stamping that I did on the other side. It is a little bit tricky working with the pattern paper there, but this was a decision that I made after the fact, so you just gotta kind of make the best of things at that point. So I went ahead and did the same kind of 2-tone stamping, and definitely does not have to be perfect. I'm just adding a little bit of texture behind my cluster so that it matches the other side. Now I'm bringing in this sticky mat. This is something I've had in my collection for a very long time, and it's similar to the sticky mats that are out on the market now. Like you can get them for the stamp wheel and things like that. This one, it was actually supposed to be a gel plate, but it does not work very well as gel plate because it's too thin. But it's nice and sticky, just tacky enough to hold die cuts. Now I cut these out of my Cricut. This font I think was called Husband, and it has some very detailed little bits. So it's a perfect way for me to ink these up because it's holding them secure for me and I don't need to hold them with my fingers. I am using a very old, close to my heart ink called Willow. It's a very nice bright green, and I'm just inking about half to 3/4 of the way up. I want to leave the top white so I have some highlight. Now, when I was designing this in Cricut, I did make an offset for it, and I cut that offset in Sapphire cardstock from Close to My Heart. And I'm just going to use little dots of glue to glue these onto the offset, and they should pop off on my page really nicely. Now, I have another word here that I used a more scripty font for. I believe it's called Badler. I just use system fonts in Cricut Design Space because I don't currently have access. And so I just use the different fonts that I've downloaded from the internet. So I couldn't tell you exactly where this one came from, but I really loved how playful it looks And I'm using Lagoon ink to do the same sort of ombre inking as I did on the other words. I want to do a different color so that it pops and adds a little bit of contrast to the title. Now I went ahead off camera and stuck those on. I also used dimensionals under the blue layer, the dark blue layer, so they are lifted off the page a bit. Now you can see down this bottom cluster, I didn't really mention this cluster, I didn't show it. It just has a few little pieces and then that stamped piece that says swimming in the sea. And remember I said I thought the Glacier was just a little bit too light, so I stamped it again in Lagoon, inked the edges. I'm very carefully using my paper crafting tool here to try and peel up this little starfish that I added with the Barely Art glue. It sticks really good. So it's really hard to get off, but I'm very carefully peeling it up because I didn't want to have to cut a new one. And then I'm just going to tape this on right on top, and I think the Lagoon ink looks a lot better. There was one more thing that I did off camera in that top right cluster. I did sneak a little bit of that stamped seaweed in the background. I had meant to stamp it before I stuck everything down, so I had to do some surgery up there too and just sneak that stamping in because I wanted to repeat that from the other cluster where I had the seaweed stamped. Now I am going in with one of my favorite embellishments. These are the flat adhesive-backed pearls from Stampin' Up. I love how iridescent and shimmery they are. To me, they are the perfect embellishment for any kind of ocean, pool, beach pages, and they just kind of glow. They are the perfect little accent. I don't have shimmer or glitter anywhere else on this layout. I was very tempted to add liquid glass to the title, but I didn't. And this was a way for me to just bring in some shine. I finished off these pages with some journaling on that journaling spot, and here is a close-up look at all of the details. I really love how this layout turned out, and I think it's so fun to have such a big collage of photos. And because I have white in the background, it kind of looks like they're all matted with white, but I just left spaces between them. We have some nice detail in the clusters, but really those photos are the star of the show and really capture your attention. I hope this page gave you some ideas of how you can start with photos and then work your whole design around that. If you want some more ideas of different ways to start your layouts, check out this playlist here. And I'll see you very soon with another video.